Today we're going to replace the power button proximity sensor flex cable on an iPhone 4S. As you can see, this one is stuck. Basically, there's a circle on the screen trying to spin, and because the power button is not functioning properly, we really can't do anything with the phone. So I don't know for sure that that's the problem at this point, but it's usually what's going to cause something like this to happen, especially when the power button doesn't spring back up. So if you remove your two pentalobe screws from the bottom of the phone, set those aside, and then we'll slide the back panel off and disconnect the power button flex and see if that changes anything. So what we'll do is start by disconnecting the battery terminal itself, and then we're going to remove this panel up here at the top left-hand corner. And this is our replacement part. Be careful taking these out of the bag. A lot of times the adhesive gets stuck to the plastic, so you have to be real careful as those will tear easily. So we've just got two Phillips head screws down here that we will remove, and then there's a little black piece that goes over one of the antenna wires. And as soon as I take these screws out, I'll usually grab a pair of tweezers and just remove that piece so it doesn't get lost. And we can set that aside, get a small pry tool, and pull directly away from the table on the battery terminal. Very carefully. You don't want to damage what's underneath that. That can be bad news. And once we disconnect this pop connector, we have some screws up here at the top we're going to take off, 4 in total. And then what we'll have to do is just kind of pry this panel downward a little bit. And you'll see here in a minute that what I'm going to do is switch my screwdriver over to the flathead side and very, very carefully get underneath this clip on the bottom right-hand side of that panel that I'm working on right now. And before I do that, I'm going to put my other hand on the panel, kind of pull it down towards me a little bit. And then we're going to get behind this metal piece. Be very careful around these flex cables. We just want to get inside there and twist it enough so that it unclips. Then you can lift it up and just pull it out. These two tabs down here at the bottom secure it against the logic board. And just to make sure we're working with the right cable, you want to match that up, and it's actually the one right next to the camera flex cable. So if we disconnect this, plug the battery back in, now the phone should not be in that little loop. It's not really a boot loop, it's just got a circle frozen on the screen, wouldn't go anywhere. And since we don't have a power button, what we're going to do is go ahead and just plug in a power supply, because that will turn the phone on if everything's functioning properly at this point. And you can see there we have our Apple. So the phone did turn on, everything seemed to be working fine. It's just the cable itself that's got a problem. So we're going to go ahead and proceed with the replacement. So again, we need to disconnect the battery first thing. And then we can go ahead and remove the camera and disconnect the remaining flex cables. And anytime you want to, you can actually remove the battery from the phone. But I'm going to start unplugging this stuff first. So we've got our 2 at the top for the screen, and then 3 other flex cables on the left, in addition to the camera cable. And then we have a bunch of other screws that we're going to have to take out. We will need to remove the logic board for this repair, and you might have to apply some heat to get the battery out. This one didn't have too much trouble. There's a little bit of adhesive underneath it. Just make sure you've unplugged it from the logic board itself. You don't want to tear that cable, or you will be buying another battery. And you want to be careful of those flex cables that are at the top end of the battery compartment. They literally just lay against the back of the midframe. So any little scratches or tears that you put in those, and it will mean that you have to replace them. So be very careful when you're working around this stuff. We have a little metal panel here held in with 2 screws. We can just go ahead and take that off, and then take our pry tool and very gently pull up on this pop connector until it releases, and then you might have to apply some heat. There's a little bit of adhesive on the back of that. Be real careful with that when you peel it down. And we'll go ahead and disconnect the antenna wire down here at the bottom. And we've got our hidden screw up here in the corner of the board that you wouldn't see if you didn't know it was there, so make sure you remove this one. Anytime you try to pull the logic board out with that attached, you're probably going to crack it, so this is very important. And that, of course, had another little gold colored metal tab that grounds out the camera, I believe it is. And we have an antenna wire here to disconnect at the top, and pull out this little deal I actually got ahead of myself, so I'll pull out the retaining clip first. Then we do have an antenna wire that is connected to the board at the top. Just very gently lift up on that one. And then we'll go ahead and take out the remaining screws. With these two larger ones, you'll have to use a slotted screwdriver, most likely, at least to get it started. And sometimes it even helps just to have tweezers to get these things out. And if you look very carefully, you'll notice at the top right-hand corner of the battery compartment, there's actually a stray screw stuck to the adhesive, and I can see that that one came from whenever this lens was originally replaced. Most likely it's been removed before. And make sure you take out your SIM card tray. That will help you get the board out of the phone. That stray screw up there, we'll address that later, but usually that one either has not been replaced or wasn't screwed in properly the first time that the lens was installed, so we'll have to put that into that corner. It is kind of tricky to get to, so a lot of people don't get that one properly. We've got two screws up at the top that hold the power button in place, and then we've got this adhesive that this flex cable is really goofy. It actually goes underneath the earpiece speaker, and then it wraps around the top, and the proximity sensor goes in under this little black clip that you'll see here shortly. So I'm just pointing out the screws here. Those are a little awkward to get to. It's actually better to remove the entire lens to perform this repair. You can see the flex cable there that leads underneath the earpiece. I'm going to do the repair as is. I'm not going to pull the lens off. It is definitely safer to remove the front screen before you do anything. But if you're real careful, you might be able to save some time and just go ahead and take everything out from this point. I will leave that up to you. So you can see we've got this little metal clip here that actually connects on both sides. Just kind of clips into place. So if you can get under there with your tweezers very carefully, we're not too worried about damaging this flex cable since we will be replacing it. But if you get underneath and kind of work your way towards what would be the right-hand side of the back of the phone, you should be able to unhook this, and hopefully it won't go flying across the room. If it does, you'll have to go look for it. But this is what actually goes over the top of the proximity sensor, and you can see it just kind of fell off of the tweezers there. Easy to lose that piece, so be careful. And once we do that, you can actually pry the proximity sensor out of its housing where it sits on the top, and you can see it's just really strange that they ran this flex cable over the top of the earpiece speaker. Well, technically the back side of it, but in any case, it just makes the repair a little more complicated than on the iPhone 4. I'm going to heat this up a little bit so that we can get that earpiece out. It's a little tricky to keep it in perfect working condition, and the reason is there's some adhesive that seals the speaker to that flex cable, and it prevents dust and debris, and most importantly metallic substances from getting accumulated on the magnet on where the speaker is at, and that will generally cause it to sound progressively worse and eventually stop functioning altogether. So we want to try to salvage that little rubber gasket that goes around the speaker. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pull the flex cable out from this big mess of wires that we have in there, and then we'll go ahead and remove the entire thing from the assembly, and then we'll pull the speaker off. So I'd recommend you just leave that on there for now. Remove these two screws at the top, and then we can take the flex cable out of the housing. So this is what we're looking at. There is some hardware we need to transfer. The plastic piece at the top where the power button is, and you can also see why the power button doesn't work anymore. That little black spot in the center is missing. And we're going to try to get between the flex cable and the adhesive here. So you want to keep that rubber gasket if you can. And the best way that I found to do this is just kind of heat it up a little bit and then take a dulled razor blade and go between the two of them very carefully. And you should be able to salvage it without causing any damage. Just have to be careful. Here I'm just demonstrating that the power button still does click. It just doesn't have enough clearance because of that missing piece that you can see the replacement still has. So this part, I went off camera a bit here, but this comes off pretty easily. Again, with the razor blade, you can try to kind of just get underneath the flex cable, and it will pull right off of this little plastic piece once you get it started. And then we'll just set that aside for now. On the new flex cable, you should have some adhesive on the back, so you have to remove this wax paper. And it's kind of hard to mess this up because they do give you some holes that can be used as guidelines to make sure you get everything centered. Just make sure you don't get your plastic piece flipped around the wrong direction. And that'll sit right on top just like the original. And now we're going to go back to our earpiece speaker here, which is stuck to the flex cable. So again, a little bit of heat always makes it more pliable. And now we can just very carefully go right underneath the flex cable and just kind of pull it away from this sticky stuff that's on that little foam gasket. And then you can just kind of peel it away as long as you're holding the other end. And there you can see we've kept everything intact, and that's going to help protect the speaker, make it last a lot longer. And that is going to sit right on top of this area, just like it did on the old one. And it doesn't really matter, but the factory assembly shows these prongs pointing upwards, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in the same direction. As far as I remember, it will actually make contact with the logic board either way, so it's probably not that important. Once we get that installed, the proximity sensor will kind of fold over the top of what we're looking at from this direction. And what I would do first of all is obviously remove these little wax papers so you have some adhesive to hold this in place. Then we want to make sure that our power button is still inside the case and in the right position, so I'm just going to push that back up. And then this is going to go right inside with the button facing, not that way, actually. We want the button to be facing the top of the phone. So actually flip that over. Here we go. And this is the tricky part. Getting these screws in can really be a challenge, so I ended up putting the outside one in first and then the inside. They're just a little tricky to thread and line up straight, so you might want to use some sort of clamp, maybe a binder clip or a clothespin with something padded so you don't scratch the surface of the glass or anything. But some people find it easier to have something to hold this in place, or possibly have a third hand. And once we get that top part secured and we've checked and we make sure the button is springing back, it's clicking the way it's supposed to, then we just go ahead and lay this back down inside the way it was originally. And of course, take off these little pieces of paper so that this thing will stick. And once we get the speaker back down inside there, we just fold this cable, kind of checking my work here to make sure I didn't miss anything. Set the speaker right down inside, and then the proximity sensor actually folds over the top and into this little plastic housing at the top. And from there, you can go ahead and put that clip back into place that will hold this thing. Hopefully, you might have to sometimes bend those inward a little bit so that they'll grab again. But this will go right back on top, and that will hold everything in place for the most part. Sometimes they don't stay perfectly aligned, but once we put the logic board on top, everything should kind of be locked into place. And kind of get this mess of cables out of the way here. Make sure this is routed properly. And now we can go ahead and install the logic board, connect the battery, and verify that our power button is functioning properly. And one screw here down in the middle of the logic board should be enough to hold it temporarily until we have enough time to test it. And we'll plug in our power button flex. And there is one more thing that we want to salvage off of the old flex cable if possible, and that's the padding that goes on the back of this cable. On this one in particular, I did heat it up a little bit and I started to scrape it off, and sometimes they just fall apart. So if you're not able to salvage the old pad, you can take a piece of electrician's tape and cut it to the same size. Sometimes you want to double up on them depending on the thickness of the original pad. But what this will do is prevent the power button flex from being disconnected if the phone experiences any shock, if it's dropped or something like that in the future. And once we get this plugged in, we will connect the battery, flip the phone over, make sure that we do have power running to the phone, and then we can go back in and track down that stray screw and get it reinstalled. And that's what we're looking for right there. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button, share it with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Post your questions in the comment section below or visit gocellphonerepair.com/forum. Thanks for watching.